So the Las Vegas Raiders officially lost to the Cincinnati Bengals 41-24. This was a game that early on it was kind of close, right? The Raiders went right downfield. They scored a touchdown on the first drive that they had the football. And things looked pretty good early on, but unfortunately the Raiders just weren't able to capitalize. And basically it's the same exact thing we've seen pretty much every single week up to this point. And that is that the Raiders are just very, very inconsistent. The Raiders right now on the offense side are unable to get it done, and we're at the point where we're 2-7, and this season's 100% over. There's no hope for the Las Vegas Raiders at this point. It's going to be interesting to see kind of how the rest of the season kind of shapes out, because Desmond Ridder came in today. I felt like that was the wrong move to make, especially considering the fact that this guy hasn't really been here that long. But the Raiders decided to go to Desmond Ridder, and honestly, this game was over. I'd say at some point in the third quarter, we're down by 3 touchdowns, and it was Jack Jones that got an interception. A pick six kind of got the Raiders back into the game a little bit. But the Raiders decided not to go back to Gardner Minshew at that moment, and I felt like that was the wrong thing to do if you wanted to win that game. Because Desmond Ridder, he had one drive, which was the final drive that kind of skewed his stats. He threw a touchdown on that drive as well, but generally speaking, he did not look good. The run game was kind of average for the Raiders today. But it's just the same inconsistencies that we've seen up to this point. And I think we're at the point where the Raiders have to really consider firing both Antonio Pierce as well as Luke Getsy. You know, I don't think firing Luke Getsy is good enough at this point. There was a stat that I saw on the screen. I'm sure most of you guys saw this if you guys watched the game. Right before half, it said that the Raiders had essentially been outscored in the final 2 minutes of the first half. They were outscored, I think it was like 46-3, right? We were outscored this season 46-3. And that just kind of goes to show you that when it comes to managing the game, the Raiders are a very, very poor team at that. Right? When it comes to being able to run the clock out, not go 3 and out with like a minute left, and then ultimately let the other team go downfield and score the way the Kansas City Chiefs did against the Raiders. Moments like that, the Raiders are really, really bad, and I feel like that comes down to just your head coach not being able to manage games properly. There's been multiple times over the past 2 seasons, right, since Antonio Pierce has essentially been here, where we looked at what AP did from a decision-making standpoint, and we said that just doesn't make sense. All right, what Antonio Pierce is doing for the Las Vegas Raiders just didn't make sense, and we're at the point where he's still doing those things. All right, today, the Raiders had an opportunity to potentially score before the half. I think we had like 36 seconds left. May have been 32, somewhere around there. The Raiders hit 2 pass plays, picked up about 20 yards. We had 2 touchdowns, and we wasted both timeouts on those two plays. You know, most good teams, they'll hit for 20 yards. They'll call a timeout. But if they have a play that goes for 5 yards, they don't call a timeout. They hurry it up, and they keep that timeout for a play where you pick up 15, 20, 25 yards downfield. The Raiders didn't do that, right? And it's just moments like that where you say this just doesn't look good, right? And it's one thing that the Raiders don't have a quarterback. You know, I still don't think the Raiders' biggest issue right now is the quarterback position. I know Gardner Minshew's not a great quarterback, but, you know, there's things that the Raiders could do, I feel like, that would make them a better team. And I had talked about this in the past, where I feel like if the run game's not working, get away from the run game. If it's not working, stop running the football and throw it. And essentially that's what we did in the beginning of the game. We came out on the first play of the game and we threw it deep to Trey Tucker. When you throw the ball deep, that's going to open things up a little bit. On the second play, we hit Jacoby Myers for like 15 yards. And we just continuously pushed the ball through the air on the first like 6-7 plays of the game. And right after that, we ran it 3-4 times. We picked up like 30 yards, right? And the Raiders just had success. And I feel like a part of that was just because we were throwing the football. And I think the Raiders would be a better team if they continue to throw the football. And if they ran the ball after throwing it, right? Essentially throw the ball to be able to have success running the football. We're not a run-first team. I think most of us already know that at this point. There were a couple of nice plays that were made this game. You know, Jack Sparrow-Johnson had some really nice blocks that I saw. There was one play, I think it was the first drive of the game that we scored a touchdown, where this guy like hip tossed someone. It was a running play, but he still was absolutely able to toss someone out of there. There were a couple nice plays. Jack Jones made a really nice play. Maxx Crosby had some plays where he generated pressure, you know, although it wasn't perfect. You know, at the end of the day, the Raiders right now just aren't good enough. And it's not just the offense, it's the defense as well. The Bengals scored 41 points on the Raiders. Now, some of that was off of turnovers towards the end of the game. But even before that, right, the Cincinnati Bengals essentially scored, I'd say 31 points before they had points off turnovers. The 31 points essentially came because the defense wasn't able to get stops. Joe Burrow's first 4 touchdowns, he was like, I think at some point, 25 of 27 or something crazy like that, and he had 4 touchdowns at that point. And it just hasn't looked good for the Raiders this year. And I think one of the things the Raiders have to do is they got to get some players, just generally speaking, for the Raiders, got to get players that can make plays. Last year, one of the things the Raiders had going for them was they were forcing turnovers. They're able to make plays, right? Guys were fired up, right? Malcolm Koonce was getting after it. Maxx was getting after it. This year, we don't really have that, right? This year, our defensive line's not as good as last year. And obviously, we have injuries, and this is 100% understandable. Our linebackers aren't playing as good, right? I feel like Robert Spillane has taken a massive step backwards. This guy's missing so many tackles out there. And we got to be realistic. You know, if Robert Spillane wants a contract and be here for 3-4 years, you gotta be consistent. And I'm pretty sure at this point, Robert Spillane has the most missed tackles for the Raiders on the defense side of the football. To me, that's not acceptable. You look at guys on the defensive side. The safeties aren't great. The linebackers aren't great. The corners, they have their moments, right? Jack Jones obviously had a pick 6. But at the same time, we had another play in which they ran a fake screen. Mike Gesicki ended up running a seam route, and the fake screen, the corners jumped, and you hit it for an easy touchdown, essentially. You had other plays as well where guys were, they're playing too loose, I would say, right? Guys were just too unaggressive, right? And Joe Burrow was having his way, especially early on in the game, man. Chase Brown had 5 catches for 37 yards. All his catches came in the first quarter. In the first half, right? 27 carries for Chase Brown, the running back, 120 yards, 4.4 yards per attempt. That's not good enough. And then Thayer Munford, man. Thayer Munford was absolutely terrible for the Las Vegas Raiders. It's crazy because coming into this season, people were like, hey, Thayer Munford's the future for the Raiders at the right tackle position. And the thing is he got not only beaten out, and he essentially lost his job to DJ Glaze, but the guy's not even our second string left tackle at this point. Andres Pete, who's really not that good, is actually in front of Thayer Munford at this point. We unfortunately had some injuries today. Colt Miller went down. Andres Pete stepped in. He went down as well. And then Thayer Munford came in, and Munford gave up 3 sacks today. That's not good enough at all, right? And there was one play where Amir Abdullah was supposed to chip with Thayer Munford, and I saw some people talking about that on social media about the play. If you guys have watched my film breakdowns, we've talked about those type of plays a lot. Running backs, tight end chips aren't always about getting your helmet on a guy. It's not always about chipping a guy, right? Sometimes it's if the defensive end goes outside, then you chip him. If a defensive end goes inside, you don't chip him, right? There's rules to the chip game, essentially. And on that play, that defensive end went inside, and he still was able to beat Munford. The Raiders got to figure out the offensive line. And I understand injuries happened today. Even Cody Whitehair ended up going down at some point. I understand the Raiders will have to figure out the offensive line, but we got to make sure going forward, into next year specifically, that Colt Miller has to be 100% healthy, and he has to be a top 12 tackle. Some people have speculated that Colt Miller doesn't love football. He doesn't love the game, and he's not potentially going to ever return back to form. I don't know if that's true, and I'm not going to say that that's what's going to end up happening, but Colt Miller has to get back to form. I think that's going to be the big part going into next year. And then we got to make sure DJ Glaze is the guy. Even if you're not 100% sure this guy's the guy, you got to get a right tackle. Because if you don't have guys that can anchor down on the offensive line, whoever your quarterback is next year they're not going to have success, right? They're going to consistently be pressured. And then we got to make sure Jackson Powers-Johnson stays at center. Obviously, I haven't watched the tape yet, but our offensive line from the interior looked solid, right? Especially when Gardner Minshew was out there. I felt like there wasn't a whole lot of pressure at that point. So to me, the Raiders got to make sure Jackson Powers-Johnson plays the position. We got to make sure our tackles are legit. And we got to make sure we have our guards that are difference makers. And the good thing for the Raiders right now is the fact that we have a lot of those guys already there, right? DJ Glaze could be legit, which means he could be the Raiders' future at right tackle. Colt Miller is here already, right? And he's shown us upside. So he could be the left tackle of the future, right? Or at least the left tackle going into the next season. Some of those players are potentially already here. We just got to make sure we 100% can agree that these guys are it. There's guys that that have expiring contracts. We got to move off of some of these guys. I'm not 100% sure if Robert Spillane and Nate Hobbs and Trayvon Merrick all deserve contracts, Divine Diablo. But Tom Telesco has to figure that out. He has to figure out who's going to ultimately be worth whatever they're going to end up wanting, right? Because if Robert Spillane wants $11 million, he's not worth that. But if he wants 5 or 6, he might be worth that, right? So Tom Telesco's going to have to figure all that out. Also, we got to add some more weapons on the offensive side. You know, Jacoby Myers had 8 catches for 105 yards. Brock Bowers, 5 catches, 45 yards, and a touchdown. And those two guys are definitely part of the future, but that's probably it, right? Like, if you need a guy that can absolutely be a difference maker on the offense, that can carry an offense, outside of those two guys, we don't really have that at this point. Sure, we got guys like Alexander Madison and Zamir White. We got guys like Trey Tucker and Harrison Bryant, and these guys could technically make plays, but they're not difference makers. I think they haven't proven they can win their one-on-one matchups and be consistent. The Raiders got to find playmakers. And the good thing with the Raiders is you're going to have a lot of draft picks, right? You have a first, second, and third, which you'll have already. You'll have that additional conditional pick, right? The Jets won this past week. Devontae had a pretty good game, so either the Jets are able to make the championship game, or Devontae's either a first team or second team All-Pro. I think that's more likely, right? Devontae getting like the second team All-Pro. The Raiders got to add weapons with those 4 picks that they'll have essentially in the top 96. You got to be able to hit with those picks, right? That's going to be the most pivotal part for the Raiders going into this offseason. You got to be able to get 4 contributors with those 4 picks. And the biggest contributor is going to come down to that quarterback position, right? Because what we've seen up to this point just hasn't been good. Gardner Minshew's not the future. Aiden McConnell's not the future. And Desmond Ridder damn sure is not the future. I do think Desmond Ridder has upside, but you can't expect the guy to come into, you can't expect the guy to come into a team a week and a half and just, win a game for that team. It's just not realistic. That too, he came in, we're already down by 2 touchdowns. It's just not realistic, right? And he hasn't worked with Jacoby, he hasn't worked with Brock that long. It's just not realistic for that, and I feel like part of that is also on the coaching staff. These guys got to do a better job, to be honest. It just doesn't look good at this point. Now, the Raiders are 2-7 at this point. There's multiple teams with 2 wins. So I won't get too much into it at this point. We'll probably check in tomorrow once the first set of games have mostly been done. The Raiders are going to end up having a top 5 pick this year, right? This team's just not good. Our schedule has winnable games, but honestly, this team's not beating a lot of these teams that are on our schedule. So, at this point, I think the Las Vegas Raiders are going to end up the top 5 pick. You got to get a quarterback. There's just no excuses going forward. You got to draft a quarterback, but more than that, you got to get that offensive coordinator. That's a good coach, right? And you can't continue to rely on guys that are not good at what they do, because we've hired guys that, Josh McDaniels might have been a good offensive coach, but he's a bad head coach. He's not a leader of men, right? You get a guy like John Gruden, who might be a great offensive coordinator. Some people like him as a head coach. But you gave him the power to draft whoever he wants, and he's not good at that, right? We already knew that after he wasted all those picks back in 2019 and 2020. The Raiders got to hire a good general manager, and I think they have that with Tom Telesco. Now they got to find that head coach, offensive coordinator combo. And I don't think Antonio Pierce is it. I'll be the first to tell you guys, I have no faith in this guy. I think the Raiders are better off firing him at some point and just looking forward to restart going into next year. And some people are going to say you shouldn't have inconsistency at the head coach position. The thing is good offensive coordinators win games in the NFL, right? Good playmakers win games. Ben Johnson's dominating with the Detroit Lions. The Houston Texans, Bobby Slowick has done a really good job in so many different aspects. We got to go out and get one of those 2 guys. I think it's just hard to continuously think that we're going to be able to have success with a guy like Luke Getsy. And even if we fire Luke Getsy, what if next year we hire a guy equivalent of Luke Getsy? What if the guy we end up hiring is just not good, right? So for the Raiders, you got to get a guy that has already proven it, right? Shane Waldron's another guy. He's the offensive coordinator of the Bears. He's shown some upside as well. Cliff Kingsbury might be able to come to the Raiders. Maybe you hire him as your head coach, right? We saw what he's been able to do with the Commanders, and Jaden Daniels, the rookie quarterback this year. He's another guy, right, that the Raiders could potentially bring in. I just think the Raiders got to get a guy that if you get a quarterback, your head coach can actually develop and build that guy, because what I see right now is just bad, right? The spacing's bad. The concepts are bad, right? How many times have the Raiders had these plays where the quarterback throws it to a wide receiver The wide receiver thinks it's going to be a back shoulder pass, and the quarterback throws it over the top. He thinks the receiver is going to end up continuing vertically, and the quarterback's trying to throw it over the top. How many times have had that this year? Right? How many times have we had that exact scenario happen? More than that, we've had moments where Devontae runs it out and Minshew throws a curl and then leads to a pick. We had it on the other side with Jacoby on the left side of the field. This guy runs a curl and we throw it out. Right? It's just bad, and that's on the offensive coordinator. Right? That's 100% on the offensive coordinator. We've had spacing issues. We've had issues with, are we helping Thayer Munford while Thayer Munford's out there? That's common sense as well. You got to help that guy. He's not a good tackle. You got to help Thayer Munford. It's little things that the Raiders have not been able to do, and I just feel like, it just comes down to coaching at the end of the day. All right, and to me, the Raiders got to figure it out. It's unfortunate, 2-7. This season's basically over at this point. We'll see what ends up happening, man. We're obviously going to be continuing to cover the Raiders, right? We'll cover every single week as we go forward. The draft's not that far away, right? We're in November. The Hula Bowl starts in January. We're 2 months away from the Hula Bowl starting. The college playoffs will start around that same time. We'll get the Senior Bowl with the East-West Shrine game, the Combine, the draft. It's a process. And the thing is, if the Raiders have the 5th overall pick, the chances are the teams picking in front of us already have quarterbacks, right? It could be the Patriots, could be the Titans, it could be, even the Saints, right? I don't know if the Saints are 100% out on Derek Carr. Those teams might not take a quarterback. So for the Raiders, 4th, 5th overall pick, you're in a spot to take a quarterback. So we'll see what ends up happening, man. I hope you guys all can enjoy the rest of your guys this weekend. And we'll be back tomorrow. I want to check in on Jackson Powers-Johnson. I also want to watch Thayer Munford and just watch every single one of his snaps just to get a general idea of kind of what happened with him. Maxx Crosby went up against a rookie right tackle, and he had some good plays that he made, but the rookie also had a ton of plays where Maxx really wasn't in the play. And I want to know if Maxx Crosby was being chipped over there, because something tells me he probably was being chipped. But we'll be doing some film breakdowns this week. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I will see you guys next time with another video.